Pete, the market for autonomy, it's all over the map. You've got some folks saying, got to be level 4 full self-driving. And then you got the traditional OEM saying, no, we're going to do L3. Is L3 even going to scale?
Boy, that they're jumping right into the deep end here, Grayson. Is level 3 going to scale? Not anytime in the foreseeable future would be my answer. I think it's something that's still drawing a lot of interest from automakers, particularly those who have given up on some of their full self-driving efforts, thinking about Ford pivoting from Argo to Latitude, Hyundai pivoting from Motional to its own internal effort that still remains largely undefined, General Motors pivoting away from cruise toward more sophisticated driver assist systems. So there's interest there, but I don't yet see any, hard and firm contracts that would suggest that we're going to be talking about meaningful scale in the foreseeable future.
Why do you think the interest is there? Honda with the Sony car, they alluded to it at CES, but I think it's a PlayStation car on wheels. Where's the interest coming from?
That is redefining the cabin is probably a different podcast, but where is the interest for level 3 coming from? And Honda as well as Afeela had some announcements at CES that we can dive into, but I think the interest is coming from the idea that this might be the magic moments that drivers want, right? Where they can, in theory, I'm not saying that this is where L3 is actually going to go, can take their hands off the wheel and go do something else with their time. That's the promise and potential of this, which makes it interesting. And we can spend hours, if not days, getting into why that's a really complicated thing. But just to kind of like level set too, like driver assist systems, level 1 and 2 from SAE, where there's a human that's always responsible. The car is always assisting. Level 4 and 5, the human has no role in the driving experience. And level 3 is this, what's been called a very mushy middle. So we can get into that, but just to define where we're at on the SAE scale, that's what we're talking about.
That magic moment turns into that risky moment. Sergey, if you got a PlayStation on wheels and you're in the middle of a game, you're not paying attention to the road. I don't really care who you are, which it's risky. So how the heck do you insure that risk? Because in an L4, you can sit in the back seat and play PlayStation until your heart's content. You can even have a beer or a cocktail. I like martinis. Have a martini. But in an L3, you can't drink. You can't play PlayStation. It's risky. How do you insure against that?
So first of all, you can insure level 3. And I think the definition of level 3 is not firmly set. The definition of level 2 is pretty much your traditional ADAS. That's what Mobileye does. It's your emergency braking and lane keeping, and maybe, blind spot notification. And the way it's insured today is that you buy the insurance policy and you're good to go. Maybe sometimes you can get a discount if there is some fancy ADAS on board. But if level 3 actually does part of the driving, let's say corrective steering or maybe, hazard avoidance, then technically the insurance should be easier for level 3 because level 3 should be helping humans in driving better. But I still don't know if that's the case. For example, will we consider Tesla Autopilot to be level 3? Or is it still level 2? Or is FSD level 3? Or is FSD level 4? So it's like, what's the definition between L2 and L4? Where exactly is L3? But whatever it is, I can tell you that even if you have a vehicle, let's say from GM, Ford, or Hyundai, and it says L3 and it does some really good things, but it's not full self-driving, you still go buy your insurance policy today. So it's going to work. I mean, you have to have it. The way where it might get confusing and challenging is, well, if an accident actually happens, and the accident happened when L3 was active, or during a maneuver where L3 was helping a human, when you analyze this claim and you look at the data, there could be a lot of effort and cost associated with picking apart who was responsible for what. And that's where OEMs can get on the hook. But again, it's more theoretical than practical. In practice, your insurance policy will pay everything. But behind the scenes, there might be a bunch of arguing to do who was responsible for what. So that's how we, from the insurance industry, that's how we look at L3. It's the same as L2, pretty much. L4 becomes a different story. And I know we're going to get into it later. But that's what's happening with L3.
So you say discount for L3. I say more expensive policy because they jack my rate up because the repair costs for the equipment and the sensors cost more. So where does that discount come in?
Well, think about it this way. If let's say you buy the latest generation Volvo and it comes with Luminar, on board, and your ADAS somehow uses Luminar to do different kinds of automated vehicle maneuvers, then yeah. But if L3 is just a better software that does, let's say, a magnitude better than Mobileye, but it's done with the same cameras, then I think the answer is no. Technically, the purpose of L3 is to prevent accidents, right? It's to make sure that people don't make stupid mistakes on the road. So then the insurance policy should follow that. Well, if I have a technology that prevents 10% or 20% of potential accidents from happening, then eventually it should be reflected in the policy. Like today, if you go to, let's say, Geico and you purchase an insurance policy, they not only look at the car, but they also ask you if you have any like telematics or like any safety programs. And then they give you an upfront discount for that. So the same thing is going to happen with L3. Well, if I buy the L3 vehicle, they should give me some discount because there are more features that protect me. So that's how it's supposed to be. Okay. In reality, it could be, yes, lower frequency, higher severity. They might balance out each other, but I don't think we actually have data to prove that. So we don't know.
Pete, you and I know we've tested all the L3 systems, the eyes on hands off system. Not all systems are created equal. I sound like a politician now, but not all systems are created equal. So where does that come into? I've been in a Super Cruise and it almost killed me, where I've been in a Tesla and actually performs. And if you read the narrative in the media, it's the opposite.
Well, I guess I would say it's complicated, right? That's one of the themes here. And I think not all systems are created equal. Not all are intended to work in the same way. I would not necessarily confer that level 3 means eyes on, hands off, or eyes off, hands off. Like, I think depending on the individual system, all those details have to be parsed. And that's one of the things that makes this really complicated and problematic when trying to explain what it is to drivers or motorists. And thankfully, in some respects, we really haven't had to do that yet, because only Mercedes-Benz has deployed a level 3 system on public roads in the United States. But to our earlier point, this is kind of coming, and sooner or later, we're going to need to streamline what this means or does not mean for motorists, and ensure that they know the performance of these systems that's expected, and also their limitations.
Since it's complicated, it's problematic. Why are OEMs investing in this technology? Because to me, Sergey can comment on this after, the trial lawyer is going to go after the deepest pockets, and the OEM has the deepest pockets, and they're going to say, well, it's the OEM's fault. Oh, driver, don't worry, you're okay. We're going to go after their money.
Brian Reamer from MIT told me about a year ago on level 3 systems that they're an engineer's dream and a lawyer's next yacht. Exactly to your point, because of these complications. And I think it is a matter of, who does a lawyer go after in the legalities of this is one of the problems. And I would not be so quick to say that motorists don't have culpability or assumed culpability, because so few people really understand this, that if you're like banking on some judge in Nevada or law enforcement officers who are responding to the scene of a crash to understand the nuances here, like the automakers don't even understand the nuances. So it gets thorny, and it's not just consumer product liability, but for motorists, there's potential criminal liability too, which obviously the companies at hand cannot speak to covering.
Since the OEMs don't understand all the nuances, how is you as the underwriter, how do you insure against that?
So as an insurance company, we sell an auto policy, even if it's the L3 vehicle. And our underwriting, it needs to somehow tie back to, okay, what's the capability of the system, and if we have any data for that. So if you tell me that I can have a customer who can take hands off, eyes off, this somehow needs to be reflected in my underwriting actuarial model. Now, there is no actuarial model for L3 vehicles, so we're still going to use the regular human performance, so we're just going to make adjustments to it. But from the underwriting perspective, I think the complication is going to be is that, well, you have to have the insurance policy by law. So even if you were eyes off, hands off, we as the insurance company that sold you this policy, we're going to pay for that. And then the complication becomes on the back end. Okay, now that the accident happened, first of all, we need to understand what happened. For that, we need data. Okay, how are we going to get the data? We need to go to the OEM. They need to pull the data. Okay, let's say they somehow pull the data. Then we need to analyze. Multiple parties need to analyze it. Then we need to communicate it to everybody. Okay, we need to communicate it to the victim, to the OEM. We ourselves need to review that, and then we need to assign the fault. And then, if the fault is agreed, then we settle or we go and subrogate the insurance company or the OEM or their captive, and it's good to go. But if people disagree who was at fault, then we'll go to court, and then the court has to decide. And then all the materials that were accumulated will have to take it in there. So there is no straightforward way how to resolve this, and it's going to be like case by case until there is a streamlined method how to take the data, quickly analyze it, and then say who's responsible for what. So the complication arises on the back end, and that's I know that people kind of are not looking forward to that. Of course, lawyers will love that because they're going to get paid along the way. But that's what the automation is going to bring. The claims are going to be much more complicated, and from the underwriting perspective, we kind of keep that in our mind as well.
I know how we settle this. I have a really good suggestion on how we settle this. At CES, Walter Piecyk crowned this the Bigelow battle. Pete had to moderate a battle on stage at CES, which Walter Piecyk, my co-host on Time Markets, has nicknamed the Bigelow battle. Pete, you did a great job over end-to-end versus verified AI. How about we host a Bigelow battle over the OEM, the insurer, and the driver? You think you can do it? I think you can.
Yes, I think we could go down that road for sure. It would be fun. But I think Sergey's point, it's not. I don't know if it would be as acrimonious perhaps as the CES panel was, which was interesting. But it is just complicated, and not to belabor the point, but I think it's something that probably gets sorted out in court over several cases over a very long period of time. And right now, there's so few cars on the road. It's really the Mercedes-Benz in America. It's the Mercedes-Benz deployment in the certain highways in Nevada and California, and a very few number of models that went on sale late in 2023. So we don't have exact data on how many cars are on the road with level 3 active, but it's very few. So we've not seen a high number of cases entering into the court system that will take years to unspool. But I think we could definitely have the discussion, Grayson, as to how do we think that this begins to unfurl itself. And by the time it does, I kind of feel like level 4 self-driving technology will be mature enough that we don't have to worry about level 3.
I agree with that. I still want you to do a Bigelow battle, and I want to be in the audience for that and bring Sergey and Walt along. Do we know if those Mercedes-Benz vehicles have in-cabin monitoring on them?
I think we would have to assume that I guess I don't know if it's a camera or if it's torque in the steering wheel, like the original Tesla Autopilot. I don't know exactly what they're using, but because they have to I have to assume the answer is a resounding yes, because they have to ensure that the driver is paying attention and able to take over when the system requests that the human driver take over. Like that is a staple of Mercedes Drive Pilot system. And that's essentially what makes it level 3, is that the machine is responsible until you get the big asterisk that says the machine's now asking you to take over human driver, and you must do it. You must do it within a certain period of time. That's kind of squishy and undefined right now. And you must be paying attention to the road enough to be able to do that at some point. So yes, they have to be monitoring in some way.
Sergey, when an insurance investigator goes out, is that data subpoenable, where you can find out the person touched the wheel when it torqued, or you can find out if they were paying attention? Is that data subpoenable?
Well, absolutely. There might be some data privacy laws that I'm not aware about, but as it relates to accidents, everything is subpoenable. So, speaking of court rulings, I don't have the details, but I know for a fact that when Tesla accidents happened, that they did present the data. I don't know how much, though. They definitely presented the data, and actually most of those court rulings were in favor of Tesla. I think there was 1 or 2 examples when they had to settle. So they definitely took advantage of that data. And if you are the OEM, you want to give that data because you want to avoid the liability, and the truth is in the data. So you'll have all the sensor output, all the videos, all the trajectories, telemetry. So you can create a case for a liability assignment. And looks like when it came to Tesla, at least based on the public outcomes of those trials, most of those were in favor of Tesla.
I think that's exactly right. But important to note that those were related to level 2 driver assist systems. And that's kind of the heart of the curveball here is ultimately in level 2, the human driver is always responsible, even if the system is actively operating the vehicle. When you get to level 3 is where you take that leap across the canyon and say the vehicle is responsible until it asks you, human driver, to take over. And that's the heart of the problem here. Is that's when it becomes more complicated in the court cases we've yet to see.
Sergey, from a legal liability insurance perspective, who makes that decision whether the vehicle's responsible or the human's responsible? Yes, there's a level, there's a guide, there's a standard, but the courts can interpret it a lot different. The underwriters can interpret it a lot different. Who's making that interpretation?
When an accident happens and you start a file as an insurance company, you do the official investigation and you use your internal resource for that. So it's a bunch of lawyers, or use like third-party administrators for that, people who are also from the legal background. And they review everything and make the case to assign a liability. And then you can either accept it or reject it. If you accept it and like, okay, clearly, let's say the vehicle was a fault or the human was a fault, then, the payout happens or the subrogation happens. If you do not accept this, then you have to go to court. So, at the end of the day, if the court can, of course, make the decision, but before taking it to the court, there is a party that presents the analysis, the outcome, and if everybody agrees, then that's what happens. But if people disagree, then they take it to the court. So there are like two layers to it. I'll say going to the court is expensive. And then, you don't forget that all those legal costs, they accrue to the eventual insurance costs, which then people pay for because, insurance companies offload it to their customers. So it's if you can settle or like come to the agreement without going to the court, that's usually the best. And right now, I think it's not easy to do. So, there are two layers to it.
Then this raises the question, do consumers even know the difference between L2 and L3? And to be very frank, do they even care?
No, they don't know the difference. And I would argue that they probably shouldn't, because I think the SAE definitions and levels have arisen, by engineers for engineers, right? So I think we do need some sort of other language to talk directly to consumers with. And I think Mobileye has kind of tried to do that with eyes on, eyes off, hands on, hands off. And that does solve some of the problems here, though not all. But it ultimately all comes back to me, it's simplicity. With a driver assist system, the car can be actively controlling the movements, but the human being is always responsible. You need a licensed human driver all the time. When you're talking self-driving, level 4, level 5, the human has no role whatsoever. You don't need a human driver. You don't need a licensed human driver. Level 3, again, that's why this is so complicated, is because now here's this third rail where we're like, well, the car, and I just pulled up the SAE definition so we can, here it is from SAE. You are not driving when level 3 is engaged, even if you are seated in the driver's seat. However, when the feature requests, you must drive. So that's kind of like this third thing that now you have to awkwardly insert into your consumer communications when you have otherwise straightforward messaging. And then you kind of get into, well, if I have to take over and I'm the backup, how long do I have to take over? Well, nobody's really saying. Well, when these systems engage and it's not asking me to take over, can I read a book? Can I text? Well, you have to be, NHTSA says you can do that, quote, in limited circumstances. It doesn't say you can do those exact things, but it does say you can take your attention from the road in limited circumstances. But you have to be alert when it comes to, spotting the fire truck in your path, for a random example that, let's just say, your level 3 system doesn't detect. So it really kind of gets down these complicated roads that, again, we've yet to see play out. But that's one reason why the likes of Volvo and Audi have walked away from level 3 over the years.
What you described, that's my Tesla FSD 13.
But the key difference, Grayson, I think, is that for now, Tesla is saying you need a licensed human being behind the wheel who's always responsible. It may have level 3 capabilities, but they're calling it, I think, level 2 plus. even as they eventually want to get to full self-driving, of course.
There's always a technicality. Always a technicality. Sergey, insurance companies, they're full of technicalities. I'm sorry. I love the industry. Full of technicalities. How do you get around these technicalities when the OEM and manufacturer is saying, well, it's really level 2, but in all reality, it's operating as a higher level of automation? Do you just insure for that higher level of risk since you clearly understand where the technology is?
Yep, the answer is yes. So the insurance industry will not try to reinvent an auto insurance product for the marginal difference in level 3. And I'm calling level 3 marginal because I don't think it's a step change from level 2. Level 4, it's a different story, but level 3, no. So even if we assume, let's say you go and buy your Mercedes with Drive Pilot, and you are hands off, eyes off in a permitted zone, and you get into an accident, your insurance policy will pay for that. And then the insurance companies will have to figure out if they're going to go after Mercedes or not, or if the investigation shows, maybe the human was not responding to the feature request, and as a result, the insurance, it was the human's mistake, not the Mercedes mistake. They're going to figure it out. But for the consumer, it's going to be no difference. It'll be great to see at some point the insurance companies giving discounts or some benefits for level 3 features, which in theory should help people drive. But based on this conversation so far, it looks like L3 might be more dangerous than we imagine. And, again, we don't have the data. It's just our thinking. So I'll tell you the technicality of level 3 is that we're just going to treat this as level 2 and level 1 and level 0. We're just going to write an insurance policy for the human driver and figure it out on the back end. Level 4 is different, though.
The data we do have, Pete, we have data from the National Safety Council around texting and driving, and we also have some NHTSA data on that. It's an epidemic, and it's only growing. It's only getting worse. The more the cars automate to get to 4, the more somebody's likely to text and drive. And as I said, we have NHTSA data and we have NSC data. To me, and Sergey's made this very clear, you've got a basket of liability where the OEM doesn't win, the lawyers win. Knowing all this liability risks out there, why would an OEM invest in this technology and not just jump to 4? Waymo made this decision early on. They said, whoop, we're jumping to 4. Why are these OEMs holding on to this?
Exactly right, Grayson. I think Waymo did jump to 4 very early in their development after looking at driver assist, because they realized that, back to like 2010, when they were doing tests in California, they realized like drivers fell asleep behind the wheel because human beings are notoriously bad at monitoring systems that work really well most of the time, but we need to be 100% of the way there. So I think that's why Waymo eschewed this whole hornet's nest to begin with. But it's hard to jump to level 4, as we've seen. That is also a huge technical challenge, and you probably have to map a whole lot more, roads in a consumer vehicle context to make a level 4 system worthwhile. I think we're going to see General Motors try that with its cruise technology in some way. We're going to see them try. I didn't say it's going to happen, but so there's no easy road here, and I think that's part of the key message, especially to automakers who tried level 4, the ones that I noted at the beginning, Hyundai, Ford, General Motors, and ultimately concluded we're not going to sink tens of billions more into this because level 4 is too hard. So now let's take our learnings and dial it back and see how we can apply them to advanced driver assist systems, be they level 2 plus or level 3. And I guess my point is these are not easier. They're just a different problem that's as complex to solve for different reasons. And now you have to go solve those too.
They're advanced liability systems. That's what they are. They're not advanced driving, they're advanced liability, because that liability is only going to get more advanced.
Well, I mean, I think Sergey referenced this earlier too. It's confusing as to who decides what a system is, right? Like right now, it's kind of the automakers call it something, and we go on their definition. And to the earlier point too, like they may be calling it something based on where they want to put it for liability reasons, and that doesn't necessarily align with the performance. Like you were saying, what's full self-driving? Performance-wise, it's probably, we can argue about this all day, but we can say it's certainly capable of level 3. But for liability reasons, I think that's when the automakers may say it's something else.
Can I add about some OEMs abandoning L4? So I think, if you look 20, 30 years from now, I think it's very safe to say that autonomous vehicles are going to be ubiquitous. You're going to see them everywhere. Maybe not in every single corner of the world, but in most of the cities that you go to. It's probably going to be different platforms, different providers, etc. And in 20, 30 years, those OEMs looking back, they're going to be like, oh, it was obvious and, we should have invested, we could have invested, but we didn't decide to invest or we abandoned our investment. And I think it's all business, They have a board of directors. They're looking at this. Well, okay, can we make money in 5 years? Well, probably not in 5, maybe in 10, maybe in 15. And then the board has a mandate that they need to create value for shareholders. They cannot necessarily attract all the best software engineers in the world to work on this. And it was a business decision. But I think, if you want to win the L4 race, you really have to look for the long term. Like there is no other way. It takes time. It's so fundamental. And the OEMs were just not built for this. Like it'll be easier maybe to start a company from scratch, which pretty much Tesla was, or like Google, like full specialists just focused on the software, which Waymo is. But it's really hard for those big corporations to reinvent themselves and to justify going like Steve Jobs on this thing when they can't calculate their next quarter ROI on this. So I think that's what it was. But I think they're going to regret this, and they're going to still be producing cars while Waymo is going to be making 90% margin on the software. But maybe nothing they could do about it. So
I agree with you with regretting. It was a bad mistake. I'll say it point blank. GM's decision to pull the plug on Cruise, bad mistake, wrong time. Forced decision to pull the plug on Argo, bad decision, point blank. Because now the OEMs are going to be forced to license an L4 state. They're no longer going to hold the cards. And Pete came on an episode. Sorry to my friends in Detroit. You're great. I love your city. But you're going to become Foxconn City. You're going to become a contract manufacturing city. When the OEMs come to the realization, we shit the bed, we've got a license. Where is that liability going to live? Where is that going to lie? Who's going to be ultimately be responsible for the liability? The costs are going to be astronomical and they're going to get bent over the cost, but where is that liability going to live?
That's a fun one. So, okay. Do you want to talk about the commercial use case or the personal use case? Because they're going to be different.
We want to hear both.
Let's talk about personal since we're talking out there. All right. Let's talk about commercial. Actually, I'm pretty confident how the commercial is going to play out, and we're already doing this to some extent. But, eventually, autonomous vehicles are going to be owned, leased, and operated by fleets. Those are going to be existing companies, new companies running, services in different cities. Those fleets will go and buy certain vehicles. Let's say I buy Ioniq 5s, or I buy something, I don't know, from Europe. Well, maybe not from China anymore. And then I have the software provider, like it could be Waymo, it could be maybe Tesla FSD, it could be somebody else. So we have a good idea how the supply chain looks like, and we know how to insure the fleets, and we know what their risks are. And then we have an ability to pull the data. So if an accident happens, then we can go to the software provider and work out with them or subrogate against them. And I think to the lesser extent, we'll go to the OEM. They just provide the metal. They just provide the vehicle. Okay. That in the commercial space is it's easy to work out, I would say. In the personal space, it becomes more complicated because, okay, now let's imagine I go buy a Hyundai with a Waymo software. And that Hyundai is, level 4, maybe has a foldable wheel. Like right now, it's not possible to insure. And the liability is definitely going to be within Waymo or whoever is providing the software. So, who's going to provide the insurance? The insurance company, the Waymo, is going to be bundled by the OEM if I buy that from Honda directly. First of all, we don't know who's going to sell it, and we don't know what the product is going to look like. That is the tough part. And I'm going to tell you that the licensing model, it's definitely workable. But on the personal side, it's also going to be departments of insurance because you have to license each product. And that's going to add, headache to the insurance industry and the consumers as well. So on the consumer front, it's going to be really fun. And I hope Koop can contribute to making this easier. But on the commercial front, we pretty much work it out.
Koop will make insurance great again. You'll usher in the golden age of insurance.
Love that.
What I think is interesting is that as automated driving technology overall has matured, that, first was make the technology possible, then make the business case possible. And I think it's a sign of maturity that we have companies like Koop like working on the insurance side now, and we're hearing more about that. We're hearing more about Waymo's work with Munich Re as another example to that. But I think like now that we're talking about the insurance, which is a big expense to self-driving companies, it's to me, it's a sign that the industry is really mature, that we're having this conversation and talking about the insurance aspects of it.
It's important, Pete. Are there any companies that you're aware of, or have you seen anything outside of a prototype where an OEM is really truly considering a foldable wheel?
Foldable wheel. Well, I think if you go back to, was it Volvo did the Concept 26 at like the 2016 LA Auto Show, which was really interesting. You remember it kind of like folded back into the dashboard. I don't see that. That was a really interesting concept at the time, and probably where the industry was at thinking about the future at that point. But I don't see that today. I saw a Zeekr vehicle at CES where the front seats turned around, so you kind of had four, 2 versus 2 seating in in the cabin of a minivan with a little table in between. But I did not see the wheel going anywhere in that scenario, which to me is maybe the 2025 version of what Volvo showed all those years ago.
Let's stay on that for a second. So the wheel with the chair turned around and the wheel was still
Yes.
visible in the cabin.
And to be very fair and clear, like that scenario worked and was enabled when the car was in park. It was not a in motion feature, though you could certainly see the day coming where once we have a level 4 system that works, or a level 3 system where you don't have to immediately be the backup when the system asks you to take over, you could see where something like that then becomes really interesting when the car is in motion as well.
Sergey, let's fast forward sometime in the future. That Zeekr vehicle's in motion. The wheel is folded. It's not out there. Where is that considered for? Where does that liability go?
Well, if the wheel is not there and the vehicle is driving itself, that's going to be whoever is responsible for the software, because software is driving the vehicle. So that liability is going to lie within the OEM if it's coming from the OEM or the software developer like Waymo, Tesla, or whoever. So 100%. And I think even from the legal perspective, there is nothing a human could do. It's in full control of the software. So that's pretty clear. Now, unfortunately, there is no insurance product for that today. So you can't insure it in the first place. So good luck folding your wheel while you drive.
So this is more of a legal question, but I want to get your perspective from an insurance perspective, because I'm actually genuinely curious, and I have friends of mine that I'm going out and having dinner with tonight. They'd love to know this too, because we brought it up at dinner. If you're in a vehicle and the wheel's folded, can you legally drink and drive?
Good question. I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that even if we were to have such a scenario tomorrow, if you're in a driver's seat, and the fact that wheel is folded is not going to declassify you from being a driver, you cannot drink, so you cannot be drunk. So I'm pretty sure, like in the short term, that's going to be like this. Now, if you get into the vehicle and there is no formal definition of who the driver is, meaning that there is no wheel at all, like it just doesn't exist, then I think the answer will be different. So I think the answer will be yes. But if it's foldable, you're in a driver's seat, you cannot drink. Your passengers can, of course, but you can't.
And this raises a really interesting question. This goes down to the open container laws. If you're in a Tesla Cybercab, no steering wheel, or if you're in the Zooks mobile in Vegas, you know my thoughts, it's a gambling mobile. Can you legally have an open container in that vehicle?
Not right now, I don't
No?
think. I mean, in a way, to be very clear here, I don't think, even if 2 passengers were sitting in the back seat of a conventional vehicle today with an open container, while someone who was not drinking at all was driving the car and in the driver's seat, I don't think the passengers today could have an open container. So I would venture to say that you still could not have an open container in a vehicle moving on a public road. We could take this to a ridiculous area where if I'm drinking and I get in an elevator, that elevator is transporting me, and that theoretically is the same thing. But I think being in a vehicle on a public road that still requires a licensed human driver would mean that even people who are only functioning as passengers, having no role in the driving responsibility still could not have an open container today.
Okay, I'm gonna give. Let's stay on this theme. Zooks this year, they say, I'm gonna say this in quotes, I'll believe it when I see it, is going to open up to the public in Las Vegas. People do a lot of extracurricular activities in Vegas. You know, they've got clubs for that, not Zooks mobiles. They gamble and they drink. You can walk out of the bar with an open container in Vegas onto the strip. What is to stop somebody from going into the Zooks mobile with an open container, and where is that liability going to live in the event of an accident?
If the local laws in Vegas do allow open container, then it's going to be fine. But I think most of the country, it's not the case. And you can imagine that, it doesn't make sense that, well, I can walk on the street in Vegas with an open container, and then I get into the Zooks and I have to throw it away. It doesn't make sense. It's just not going to happen. People, even if there's such a law, people are just not going to follow it. I think from the insurance perspective, I would not be too concerned about that in Vegas. I will be concerned about pretty much drunk passengers violating terms and conditions of the ride. I mean, you can imagine a drunk person starting smashing doors from inside the Zooks vehicle while it's being, active. So that's a problem. Now, if that happens, what do? Do you prevent certain people from getting on board, or do you go after them? Do you sue them because they violated? That I cannot tell you. That's something that Zooks will need to figure out. But we'll have to follow the Zooks lead on that, because we'll need to understand what their prevention and mitigation mechanisms are for situations like that. And I'll be very curious to see those, to be honest.
You're going to need drunk people insurance at the end of the day.
Yeah, I don't think we have that.
People are going to go in these things smashed. They're going to go in these smashed. Let's be honest. Riding in a Zooks mobile in Vegas is going to be a novelty. There's going to be extracurricular activities. You see the guy gets paid 544 pounds in dividends. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Justice Alito brought up in the Supreme Court. Gore Vidal articles. That's the Supreme Court's decision to make, not mine. But people are going to do extracurricular activities in these things. And I'll go on the record and I'll say to you, I believe more than 50% of people riding in the Zooks mobile in Vegas will be drunk. That's based on all the Vegas data. Now, do you increase the insurance premiums because these people are intoxicated, and then you're going to have extracurricular activities taking place, and you open up all sorts of cans of worms? Because guess what? If somebody does that and they put it up on what Justice Alito said, somebody reads Gore Vidal articles on, there's a lot of paperwork that comes with that. And that can open up a whole liability.
Well, we need to think about when it comes to drunk people getting into autonomous vehicles, let's think from the two basic perspectives. It's the frequency of an accident, the probability of an accident, and the severity of the accident. Well, if you have drunk people violating the terms of conditions during the ride, it doesn't increase the chance of Zooks getting into an accident. Well, theoretically, I'll say yes. Because if you start smashing doors from the inside, we don't know if it's going to somehow impact the sensors, or if it's going to impact any vehicle movement or any components at the vehicle. We don't know that. But I would say yes. From a severity standpoint, if you get into an accident with a drunk person, again, it's the medical bills that you have to pay, how bad it was. Will their condition contribute to worse medical bills? I cannot tell you that. I probably know. So it's more of a frequency question. Okay. And then, there's also the maybe even the reputational thing. Okay, well, if Zooks has a problem with drunk passengers and they start preventing people from getting in, then people are going to be upset and nobody's going to use the service and stuff like that. So from the underwriting perspective, I think overall, if you tell me that we're going to insure a fleet of AVs and 50% of passengers are drunk, it's going to be more dangerous in the eyes of underwriting than less dangerous. That's for sure.
I'm curious if either of you know, in Vegas, do open container laws prevent a drunk person from getting into an Uber with the cup in their hand, or part B to that question would be, is driving an Uber, does the Uber insurance policy in Vegas cost more based on all these concerns about what drunk people will do?
I don't know.
I would say to the individuals from Uber that listen, send me a note and we'll have you on to discuss it. But that's a good question, because it's a risk. If you look at the insurance costs for Uber have gotten so astronomically high, they're petitioning the state of New York to lower it because it's unaffordable. People can't afford it. I met with Lyft when I was in DC as part of the inauguration, And Lyft is telling me that insurance costs are just rising where it's hurting the drivers. The drivers aren't making money because people don't want to take it because the insurance costs are so high. Something has to change there. Pete, you've been inside the Zoox mobile. People do all sorts of wacky stuff. Every 6 months, 3 months, you see some idiot, sorry, they are, tries to open up the airplane door and go bye-bye. It's true. How hard is it to open those doors if somebody was in there trying to open it? It'd be funny for a TikTok video.
I mean, that's a good question because I did not try to open the doors while we were in motion. I'll be very honest with you. I was pretty lame and did not attempt to escape in any way. But that's an interesting question because I would imagine they have to be designed in a way that they're easy enough to open in the event of a crash and you needed to get out. I think that they have to be able to open with some degree of ease from the inside. But also to your point, you need to, as the manufacturer, I think, or as the operator, you need to anticipate how people will reasonably misuse your product. And that would be one of the foreseeable misuses I think that Zoox and anybody else would need to account for.
You talk to police officers, you talk to Bart Teeter, you talk to Gary McCarthy, you talk to Brett Farbia. These individuals will tell you things that you and I would never think of. And my advice to Zoox is before you operate, talk to a lot of police officers because they can tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, and unfortunately, the horrific of what they see and will help make a better product and make it safer. Then you can scale and build your business. Sergey, so robotaxis are scaling. Waymo's operating in multiple cities. Zoox is getting ready to operate. Where is the liability going to live? Is it going to live with the hardware developer, the software developer, the hardware supplier, or this is going to become very popular going in the future, the fleet operator? Or you're going to have some giant umbrella to cover everybody. Where's all that liability eventually going to live?
So I'll tell you my view of what's going to happen, and I'm pretty sure that's how it's going to happen, is that liability is going to start with fleet owners and operators. So you already saw the announcement that Waymo started pursuing the fleet model, I think, in Phoenix and in Miami. They're going to have a third-party fleet, also in Japan, by the way. So that fleet is going to either buy or lease those Jaguars, all the equipment that's coming with it. They're going to have Waymo people, pushing updates to those vehicles. But those fleets will have to do the fleet management. They have to do calibration of the sensors. They have to clean the vehicles. They'll have to plug the vehicles so they can upload the data and do all those things. And it's clearly that it's in Waymo's interest to do that because it becomes easier for Waymo to scale. They just find partners and then those partners take care of everything else. So I think that's what's going to happen. And liability is going to start with the fleet owner operator. What does it mean? Fleet owner operator needs to have an insurance policy that's going to act as the first line of defense if an accident happens, even if the fleet owner operator was not responsible, even if it was the software. For example, you get into an accident, AV was responsible, your AV fleet auto insurance policy kicks in, they pay it off, and then that insurance company goes to the software provider, and then they work out or they subrogate against them. And again, to do that, you'll have to have a lot of data available to you pretty quickly, and it's going to be a process in itself. So I think in a Zoox scenario, like Zoox is going to be different in the short term. Zoox is owned by Amazon. I'm pretty sure they're self-insured or it's Amazon's captive. So if anything happens, Amazon will pay for that. But again, if Zoox wants to sell millions of vehicles eventually, they'll have to pursue the fleet model because otherwise it's going to be just way too expensive. They're not going to make money on this thing. So I will say that fleet model is going to dominate the AV space. And liability is going to start with the fleet owner operator. It's not going to end with them. And then, you're going to subrogate against the supply chain.
Pete, do you see Zoox operating the fleet long term, or do they start pulling a Waymo and outsourcing it to fleet operators?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because of some of the things we've talked about before, Grayson, like the potential for the Zoox ride sharing to be offered as part of like Amazon Prime, I would suspect that, and especially because Zoox seems very cautious in rolling this out slow, I think for the foreseeable future that we'll see it stay under the current model where they are the owner, operator, and software tech provider all bundled together. I don't see that for Zoox in particular. I guess I don't see that changing anytime in the foreseeable future, but I guess I could see a point 10 years from now where you get to something like we're seeing with Waymo start to look at.
God willing, we get a national autonomous framework in the next 18 to 24 months, Pete. If and when we do get a national autonomous vehicle framework, how do you think things are going to change? Will we see more innovation? Will we see new models, more fleets? When there is clarity there, what do you think we're going to see?
I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian view on that one, Grayson. Like, I don't think we're going to see that much change. I think that the restrictions as of today, snapshot January 2025, have not stifled deployments in a meaningful way. We've not seen lots of self-driving truck companies want to cross state lines and not be able to do that today. We've not seen anyone come anywhere close to the 2,500 vehicle cap that's offered under the exemptions. I mean, Waymo has 600 vehicles or so on the road today. They don't even need the exemption because they conform with FMVSS. So today, I have not seen the problems. I think that's kind of been a crutch from the industry to explain away why they've not been deployed in at greater scale thus far. But there is a time coming by, let's say, 2030 or beyond, where I think there will be operators who get close to those caps, or they don't want to use a vehicle that is just a retrofitted conventional vehicle. They want to get into different form factors. The Zoox exemption. There is no Zoox exemption request. They've self-certified that it meets FMVSS, and nobody's called them on it yet. So it's just been a bit circumstantial so far. So maybe Zoox would be the first one in a few years to get closer to that cap and need an exemption if their current self-certification gets rejected or something like that. But yeah, so I don't think we've seen much of a headwind from the lack of a framework thus far, though coming up sometime soon, I see why a framework's important.
Okay, when we do get the framework, how is that going to change on underwriting autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks? How's that going to change from an underwriting perspective?
I don't think there's going to be a huge change. It's just going to be simpler because now instead of every single state coming up with their own guidelines, it's just going to be one source of truth, and it'll be easier to check our customers against that. So it's like, well, I want to deploy in the state. Well, are you confirming to the national framework? Do you have all these things? It's like a checklist. Okay, you're good to go. So it's just going to be simpler. But the essence of underwriting is not going to be changed. We're still going to look at the data. We're still going to be looking at the operating domain and the vehicle capabilities and the software improvement. It's just going to be slightly simpler.
It'll be simpler. One thing we know, Daddy's home. He's back, and the freewheeling press conferences. I think President Trump has done more press conferences in 2 days than President Biden did in 4 years. It's pretty amazing there. A lot's going to change. We're hopefully going to get the framework. President Trump has hit the ground running. I don't know. The gentleman has more energy than the Energizer Bunny. It's pretty amazing. He's got a Diet Coke button to keep the energy going. We know that. What's your outlook for the autonomous vehicle and truck markets over the next 18 months, since we have a very pro-innovation, pro-build president? Sergey, we'll start with you.
I am very positive. I think the next 4 years are going to be transformative. And, it's not just the new administration, it's also the time. We are at a time where autonomy is becoming a national security topic. And it's clearly there is a bifurcation happening in the world between China being one supplier and the US being another supplier. We'll see what's going to happen with Europe. But autonomous vehicles are becoming a national security concern. People like Elon Musk are going to push it behind the scenes 100%. That's in the best interest of Tesla, but that's going to elevate all the players in the industry. So I'm very positive. I cannot tell you exactly how many vehicles and where we're going to see in the next 4 years, but I think the train has left the station and a lot of people are already late. That's for sure.
Pete, it's left the station. It's going down the tracks. This bullet train in Japan. Where are we heading? What's your outlook?
It's interesting. I think that it's still kind of choppy. Like I would have never expected that, the week before GM pulled the plug on Cruise, I would have never expected that to happen in part because we have the regulatory tailwinds that with the incoming administration. So it is interesting that I do feel a sense of renewed optimism that's grounded in reality. Yet there are these curveballs that do keep coming, and I think we're going to make incremental gains ahead. Probably particularly with Tesla because Musk is calling some shots within the administration. But I guess I see I see it really lurching ahead where the commercial use case is the greatest, and that is in trucking and in warehouse applications, and in off-road applications, perhaps as well, construction, mining, those types of use cases for autonomy, farming and agriculture. That's where I think you'll see the biggest gains. Which is not to say that I don't think there's gains elsewhere. I just think that the barrier to entry for Robotaxi is so high that only the likes of Amazon and Google can fund that. So they can afford to lose money for however long it takes, and apparently appear ready to do so.
The oil and gas market for off-road autonomy is going to explode. It's going to get huge. There's a lot of demand there. We're seeing Kodiaks there. We're going to see more movement there. We're going to see go from Texas. We're going to go to North Dakota. The agriculture, John Deere ripped the Band-Aid off at CES and said, we're all in on automation and autonomy for a very simple reason. We want to keep the family farm in the family. And autonomy unlocks economic benefits, which will be a part of the autonomy economy. We're at the golden age of autonomy. We're there. It's going to happen. A national framework is only going to accelerate that. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is ensuring autonomy. Pete, Sergey, thank you so much for coming back on the road to autonomy. Always love having you gentlemen here.
Thank you, Grayson.
Thank you.